Hello everyone, welcome back to the Decade Dynasty, and today we're going to be going over our Week 2 matchups and just kind of overview what happened within the league. And we are going to start that overview with our game of the week, being the two newcomers to the league facing off, being the Rat Wizards and Purloiner's Pride. This ended up in a narrow victory for Purloiner's Pride. The Rat Wizards had C.J. Stroud getting 19.53 points, J.K. Dobbins with 24.60, James Cook with a massive 31.5, George Pickens with a low 5.9, and Brandon Ayuk with a very low 9.3 considering how he was projected to start off this year. Isaiah Likely dropping off after last week at 5.6, Geno Smith at 26.71, Harrison Butker at 10, and the Texans defense with a big 15 points, totaling at 148.14. Purloiner's Pride, on the other hand, had Patrick Mahomes at 19.12, Derrick Henry at 18.10, Joe Mixon at a flat 9, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 26.4, bouncing back after his slow week 1, Zay Flowers at 23.6, Cody Parkinson at a measly 2.7, Brock Purdy at 23.74, Evan McPherson at 15, and the Jets defense with 12 for a grand total of 149.66. This game kind of highlights how the positional matchups are not the biggest thing within this league. As you can see, the Rat Wizards picked up 5 wins in positional matchups compared to Purloiner Pride's 3. However, within those matchups, we had big differences, such as James Cook having 31.5 and Joe Mixon only having 9 to counteract that. But the biggest differences we had were in the receivers. The Rat Wizards struggling with 5.9 and 9.3, while Purloiner's Pride had both of their starting receivers over 20 at 26.4 and 23.6, giving them a very narrow victory this week. Now moving on, we see the Snare Serpents take on the reigning champion, the Hoagies. The Snare Serpents had Tua Tagovailoa at 11.17 before he got injured and exited the game. I truly hope he's okay, and I just wish he does what's best for him and what's best for his family. If that was the last snap of football that I will see him play, I'll be sad, but I'll be happy knowing that he is doing what's best for him. Moving on, though, we see Travis Etienne at 16.8, David Montgomery at 18, CeeDee Lamb at 22.5, Stephon Diggs at 8.2, George Kittle bouncing back with 22.10, Jared Goff at 19.12, Chris Boswell at 9, and the Steelers defense at 13, for a grand total of 139.89. The Hoagies start off with Lamar Jackson picking up 24.59 points in his loss to the Raiders. Kyren Williams had 16.2, Alvin Kamara with a monster 49 points, Devontae Adams at 28 points, Deebo Samuel at 21, Travis Kelce with a very disappointing 1.6, Matthew Stafford at 11.33, Cameron Dicker at 9, and the Dolphins defense going flat 0. So their grand total was 160.72. And again, this is kind of an example of how the positional matchups aren't everything. It's just an interesting stat, I think. The matchups were dead even with their kickers tying and both sides getting 4 wins in the positional matchups. However, the Hoagies got a 21-point win over the Snare Serpents in the end. So moving on, we see the Stone Oven Pizza people taking on the Vigilantes. Josh Allen had 11.89 points for the Pizza people, Bijan Robinson with 19.2, Jonathan Taylor with 19.5, Michael Pittman with a very low 5.6, Cooper Kupp before getting injured had 8.2, Kyle Pitts at 5.5, Justin Herbert at 15.64, Brandon Aubrey with a big 17 points, the Cowboys defense at 1, and the overall score for the Stone Oven Pizza people at a very disappointing 103.53. The Vigilantes, on the other hand, had Jaden Daniels taking over the quarterback slot for Joe Burrow with 20.17 points. Jahmyr Gibbs had 20.10, Isaiah Pacheco had 18.6, Justin Jefferson with 26.3, Jamar Chase with 8.5, Dallas Goedert with 7.3, Joe Burrow with 23.45, bouncing back after a rough week 1, Jake Elliott at 7, and the 49ers defense with 10 points for a grand Vigilantes total of 141.42. Vigilantes dominated in the positional matchups, only allowing 2 wins to the Pizza people here, as their team just seemed to struggle this week. Obviously, a lot of their players did well, I would consider, in their actual games, but in fantasy, those points do not transfer all the time. Ending up with the Vigilantes taking out the win over a struggling Pizza people in this week. Now moving on to our final matchup of the week, we see the military rivalry in the Meat Tanks versus the Armada. Jalen Hurts had 33.55 for us, Saquon Barkley with 20.6, Davon Achane with a big 33.5, Mike Evans with a low 8.7, Devonta Smith with 22.1, Dalton Kincaid with 7.3, struggling so far this season, Baker Mayfield coming in for Kyler Murray this week, getting 25.92, Justin Tucker with 12, and the Browns defense with 11, for a big total of 174.67. The Armada, on the other hand, had Anthony Richardson picking up 18.53 points, Breece Hall picking up 25.9, Rachaad White with a very low 3.3, Tyreek Hill with 8.1, Rashee Rice with 20.5, Sam Laporta with 3.8, Dak Prescott with 23.69, nice, Jake Moody with 5, and the Ravens defense with 8, giving the Armada a final score of 116.82. And yet another example of dominating positional matchups. We only allowed one positional win to the Armada, being Breece Hall outperforming Saquon Barkley. We ended up with a massive win this week over the reigning runner-up from last season, and frankly what was one of the most terrifying rosters after week 1, and really sent a message to the league that we are not to be trifled with here. So going to the weekly awards, the best team goes to the Meat Tanks with a whopping score of 174.67, the highest across the league. Our players of the week are Alvin Kamara at 49 points and George Kittle at 22.1 on the Hoagies and the Snare Serpents respectively. Just a reminder that we are going to make sure that our players of the week are at 2 different positions that performed hugely either for their position or for what they were expected to do. So obviously Alvin Kamara with 49 points and George Kittle as a tight end getting 22.1. They deserved the players of the week this week. Our most efficient manager ended up being the Purloiners Pride at 100% efficiency. None of their bench players outscored their starters this week in any way whatsoever. Despite not having a massive showing this week in terms of points, they put up 149.66 points, getting a very narrow victory over the Rat Wizards, and took home the Most Efficient Manager award, which no matter how you performed, is always a pretty prestigious award. So moving into league transactions, and let me just tell you, we had a lot this week. The Stone Oven Pizza people, they added Brandon Aubrey and dropped the Bengals defense. The Rat Wizards added Geno Smith, Isaiah Likely, J.K. Dobbins, and the Texans defense, while they dropped Luke Musgrave, Keenan Allen, and Zamir White. The Vigilantes added Xavier Worthy and dropped Tyler Bass. The Armada added Bo Nix and dropped Deshaun Watson, while the Purloiners Pride added Cody Parkinson and dropped Jake Ferguson. We added Jaden Reed, nicknamed Luck Runs Out, and moved David Njoku to IR, who was out with injury this week. And we have the first trade of this season in the league, being the Vigilantes trading Mark Andrews to the Hokies for Dallas Goedert, in a very interesting move. Mark Andrews was not actually starting this week. However, he did bounce back a little from last week, getting about 7 more points than he did in week 1. However, we look to Dallas Goedert, and he got 7.3 points compared to his week 1 total of 7.6. A very interesting trade here that I guess we'll just see, how that turns out for the league. Not really, I wouldn't say too huge of impact. However, it is going to have ripples that will affect the league down the stretch. So moving in to our little bit titled Outscored by the King as we go into week 2. Tank Bigsby unfortunately got injured playing against the Browns this week, and as such did not put up any points as he didn't get any carries in the game. However, that's not going to stop us with carrying on with this little segment that I personally really enjoy. Tank Bigsby, once again, scored 0 points. While there was nobody starting across the Decade Dynasty that got less points than him, there were some players throughout the league that got less points, being Mitchell Trubisky on the Bills, getting negative 0.2 points. Jake Haener on the Saints, getting negative 0.3 points. K. Dotton on the Buccaneers, getting negative 0.4 points. And Clayton Tune on the Cardinals, getting a big negative 2.6 points. So once again, while we couldn't really do it with players in the Decade Dynasty, we found a way to improvise here. So going into our Week 3 matchups across the Dynasty, we are going to start off with the Hokies taking on the Rat Wizards. The Hokies are projected to win in this matchup at 164.12. Meanwhile, the Rat Wizards are projected to get 158.23 points in a pretty narrow margin in that matchup. Up next, we see the Snare Serpents taking on Purloiner's Pride. The Snare Serpents are projected at 158.10. However, Purloiner's Pride are projected to win at 168.13. We'll see how this shapes up as we see two 1-1 teams looking to make a name for themselves within this league. Next up is the Stone Oven Pizza People versus the Armada. The Stone Oven Pizza People are projected at 164.25. However, the Armada, projected to win, are projected to get 170.07 points. This matchup showing a team looking to bounce back after a rough loss last week versus a team looking to bounce back after a rough first few weeks with the Pizza People. So we'll see how this game shows up to be. And finally, we're going to see the Meat Tanks taking on the Vigilantes. We are projected to be at 176.88 points for this week. Projected to get a pretty large win over the Vigilantes at 167.37. This is the sibling rivalry, as the Vigilantes owner is my sister. And frankly, we're looking to put them in the dirt. Kind of just show that, they might beat us at some things, but we ultimately will show them that we are better at fantasy football. So with that, we are going to move in and just kind of see how week 3 goes. We have a lot of big matchups here. Some teams looking to bounce back after rough starts. Some teams looking to make names for themselves in the league. And ultimately, we'll see who does end up accomplishing their goals here in week 3. So I'd like to once again thank all of you for watching, and hope you enjoy the next week of football, and hope you come back to see how the next week of football ends up for the Decade Dynasty. So thank you for watching, and see you next week.